Welcome back to Nena Toronto. Today I'm sitting with one of the world's most respected researchers on the topic of happiness and a direct descendant of Nikola Tesla himself, Dr. Jillian Mandich.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks for coming through.
Absolutely.
Today we're talking to mainly the Balkan demographic. So your background is Serbian and Croatian.
That's right, yeah.
Your background is Tesla, so
yeah.
Why don't we start off, I guess, with that? Like, why don't you tell me about like how you're related to Nikola Tesla and how that's impacted your life and what that means for you?
Yeah, for sure. So my last name is Mandich. When my great-grandparents moved from Serbia to Canada, they changed the spelling of my last name because it's pronounced ch, the C with the accent. And so that was my name growing up. They wanted it for pronunciation. But essentially, so my dad's side, which is why I still carry the name Mandich, so Tesla's mom has the same last name. And so let me get this right, my grandfather, who's still alive, his grandfather's sister is Tesla's mom.
Okay,
So,
I already had a brain fart.
I know, it's like
So your
my
grandfather,
grandpa,
okay,
his sister
okay,
was Tesla's mother.
wow.
Yeah.
So Tesla's mom was some sort of great aunt of yours.
Yes, some great. We should probably do the math on that at some point.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But so growing up, my grandparents, when they moved to Canada, were in Niagara Falls. So I spent a lot of my childhood visiting my great-grandparents in Niagara Falls. Wow. And ever since I was little, like now it's very common to hear people talk about Tesla.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm 38 years old. So when I was a child, it wasn't nearly
You're still
the
a
case.
child. We're still kids.
Still at heart.
Kids.
And so, but I always remember growing up, like we would go to the falls. My grandparents would always teach us, even growing up, like for Christmas, my grandfather would get us books about Tesla. He'd tell us stories about him because it was really important for my grandparents to sort of pass down this sort of family lineage and so that we knew about our history and where we came from.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Are you involved? I mean, we'll get to the Tesla stuff more as we talk, but has being related to Tesla impacted you in any way throughout your life or like your work or your interests?
Yeah, you know, it really does. I think especially when you have grandparents that are so proud of your history and your heritage that really from a young age instill that in
Serbs
you.
Are very proud
Very
people.
proud, yes.
So are Croats.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so it was always something that we sort of talked about. And when I got to learn about Tesla's life, a lot of it was an inspiring story that I helped myself with growing up. Like even to this day, I have a Tesla patent on the wall in my living room.
No way.
And the reason I have that there is a reminder of creativity. Just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean you can't create it. It's about innovation. It's about thinking differently. It's about leaning into your passions and your interests and really diving deep into that. And I think that for myself, you know, studying happiness now, there were many times when I was, you know, challenged figuring out how to do the research. No one at my university was studying happiness at the time. And I would just be like, okay, Tesla did it, right? He, you know, he knew what he wanted to work on. And just because it hadn't, he was persevered, you know, so many challenges, trials and tribulations, but just knew where his passion was, where his interests were, and just kept going. And so I would almost, and I look at that pattern sometimes, it's just like, you know, somewhere deep in your genes, you have something similar.
You can activate it.
And we all do, and we can all look to stories of people that are so inspiring and use that to inspire us as we go along our journeys too.
Yeah, well, Tesla talked about like the ether and the field, which now quantum physicists are kind of breaking the mainstream narratives that they're first. Him and Walter Russell and all those scientists spoke about the ether, and then there was a experiment that was miscalculated that said that the ether doesn't exist in the late 1800s. But now they're like, okay, there is a field, there is an ether, and you can tap into it. And Tesla talked about how creativity, spirituality, and science are all one pot.
Yeah,
and he tapped in.
I remember when I was in graduate school. So I had to take a lot of advanced level statistics courses. And I remember my stats teacher said to me one day, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence.
Yeah.
And I used to think about that saying with Tesla and stuff, just because we haven't shown it yet or we can't quantify it, and science has come a long way and continues to do that. But that's the beauty of science, is watching it grow and evolve. But just because it's not there or we haven't shown it doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible or it doesn't exist or things like that.
Yeah,
right?
well, you know what I find amusing is like, science, I was always scientific method. I was raised like atheist, agnostic. Then I had like a spiritual awakening through meditation. Then I got into like Eastern philosophy. The whole time my dad was doing Tesla magazine, Tesla this. I'm like, all right, Dad, enough with the Teslas. I respected Tesla, but I didn't know how like he connected all the dots. Mm-hmm. And then basically I kind of had an awakening, and I was just like, wow, there's so many things that are connected. But what I found interesting, like being a science guy growing up, there was an arrogance to it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, religious people are just dumb. What are you, believing in like a fairy tale, like a man in the sky? Now I don't think that way. I think that's very condescending itself. But there's a dogmatic aspect, and I'm sure you've noticed it, to researchers and scientists as well.
Yes. Where
you can look at them and be like, you're religious as well about your scientific work, and you don't really have an open mind. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and you see that especially with some scientists that get so dogmatic about, even Edison, right?
Yeah.
Where you're so passionate about this that it closes off your mind to other perspectives, other possibilities, other potential things that may be closer to approximating the truth or what's real or what's not, right? And so it's having that openness to whatever dogma you want to cling to, whether it's religion or science or anything. But that's the beauty of science, is that it's a living, breathing, continuing to evolve thing. And the more that we know, the more that we know we can know.
Yeah,
right?
I notice all the characters. I watch all the podcasts. I love the open-minded people, and especially like Huberman. I mean, you guys are connected in some ways. He's mentioned you on his show, which is amazing. I like how he's open-minded. He's a neuroscientist, and he doesn't judge like artsy-fartsy people that he talks to. He actually respects them, and he knows there's something to it, and he doesn't claim to know everything. He just, science is always evolving, and I think I think it's best when a scientist or anybody, a spiritual person, is open-minded to different ideas. I think that's how we grow as a society.
And the curiosity that's driving the questions, right? I think that you look at what Tesla's done. He was always coming from this curiosity and wanting to learn, and how can this be? And I think that a mark of a good scientist is someone that is curious and that is constantly asking different questions, taking different perspectives, being open to learn. Like sometimes I hear people sort of talk about science like it's a law, right? And the reality is what we know today could be very different tomorrow. And if new data or new evidence comes out that suggests something different, part of the process is being open to that learning,
cracking the shell,
to the creativity, to other possibilities, right? It's a big piece of it.
Let's talk about happiness.
Okay.
Something that you're an expert in. What does happiness even mean?
It's so interesting because when I tell someone I research happiness, they sort of, if I was to draw like a thought bubble, like a lot of people are like, what is that? Or how do you study happiness? But no one ever questions what happiness itself is. And I think every single person, watching has a general understanding for themselves of what it is. And we all do, and it's a very subjective experience. It's kind of like love, right? Where it's different, people experience it differently, we experience it differently throughout the lifespan, which is all well and good. But when you're a researcher, at the beginning of your study, you have to define your terms. And so the definition that I often use, one that's commonly used in the literature, comes from Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky, and she's at UC Davis in California. And that definition is the experience of joy, contentment, and positive well-being, combined with the sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. So I'll unpack that a little bit because it's a lot of words. But essentially, there's sort of two pieces to happiness, a cognitive piece and an affective, like AFF, affective piece. So joy, contentment, positive well-being, that's sort of in the moment, I'm sitting here with you right now, how am I feeling? And that's one piece. But there's also sort of, if you zoom out, the experience that one's life is like meaningful, worthwhile, you know, overall purpose. Do I feel like you can be an overall generally happy person and be having a bad day, right? Or things might not be going well at that time, but that doesn't mean that you're overall unhappy. So it's sort of like this big umbrella term. But what's interesting is what we know from research is that people are pretty good at self-reporting their own happiness. So like if I asked you right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy do you feel?
I'm like a 7.876.
I love it, all the decimal places. It's a Tesla move. So if you were a research participant in one of my studies, and often the way we will assess happiness is with a questionnaire. And so if I was to take one of my questionnaires, give it to you, score it, chances are that the number that I would get on that questionnaire would be pretty close to what you just came up with. So what we know is that we're pretty good as humans at self-reporting our own happiness. But what's interesting is what we're not as good at is figuring out what it is that makes us happy, right? Like so often we get caught in this thought pattern of I will be happy when, fill in the blank, right? When I have X amount of dollars.
I was in
when
that
I get
hole
married,
for a while.
When I get to, and it's a very natural thing. Like I even, while I was writing my PhD dissertation about happiness, caught myself thinking, I will be happy when I finish writing a PhD about happiness. So it's this very common cycle. But that's not how happiness works, right? It's not a destination. Like we don't arrive at happiness and then we're happy for the rest of our life, right? It's a transient emotion.
Would you say it's a choice?
Sometimes.
Partially.
Yes, and. So like there is a piece of it, like I sometimes see those quote cards like on Instagram or on social media, or you go to like a home decor store and you know those signs that they have you with like writing on them, you put it in the bathroom or whatever.
I'm one of those people.
It says choose happy. And it's a pet peeve of mine because it's not like you just wake up in the morning and you choose your outfit and you choose happy. It doesn't work like that. But you do have to work at it. It requires effort. Some days you may end up just having a really great day because great things happen. But a lot of times happiness is something that we actually have to put effort into. And the challenge with that is that people don't want to hear that. They want a quick fix. Like the number one question I get asked when someone finds out that I study happiness is they're like, okay, what's the magic pill? Or like, what's the secret? Or the one thing that I have to do or buy or get or say? And the reality is that happiness, the way I think about happiness is the same way that I think about physical activity or nutrition. So say after our chat today, you go to the gym and you have like the best workout of your life. You would never leave the gym and text me and be like, I just had the best workout of my life. I've reached fitness. Right? You would never do that.
I've reached apex fitness.
I'm done. I've reached fitness. Because we understand that if we want to be fit and healthy, what do we have to do? We have to move our body on a regular basis. Or nutrition, right? You could have the healthiest breakfast in the world, but lunchtime's going to roll around if you're not intermittent fasting, and you'll be hungry again. Right? We understand that we need to continually, for our life, try for the most part to eat healthy food. And so the way I see happiness is like, instead of thinking about it like a destination, if we think about it like, okay, what do I have to do today to make me happy? It's an empowering idea because now what we've done is instead of making our happiness contingent on something that may or may not happen in the future, we brought it into, okay, what is it that I can do today that makes me happy, right? Like every day you go to the gym, how do I strengthen my muscles? It's like, what do I want to do today in my life?
So it's a collection of habits. That's what makes a person happy or unhappy.
Exactly.
And it's like a ratio, I guess.
And so frequency, so having more frequent, sort of smaller bursts of happiness is a much better predictor of your overall happiness than intensity. So you could have an amazing birthday party, and that's really great, but that's one day. It's really these small sort of moments, going for a walk in the morning, you know, taking my dog Jocko out to the park, whatever it is. The reason that we don't give them as much cognitive weight is because there's small things throughout our day. It's not the big shiny moments.
It's the bricks that build the castle.
That's exactly it. And it's interesting because we also know that, say you get that thing that I will be happy when I have my dream car, my dream house. We also know from research that even if you get that thing, one, it doesn't bring you as much happiness as you anticipate that it would. And two, that happiness doesn't last for as long as we anticipated that it would. So it's really, when we think about it like a habit instead, it's sort of like a muscle, right? You go into the gym, you lift weights, and then over time your muscles get stronger. And so that's sort of how I see happiness. And the other really key piece is that a happy life doesn't mean that hard things don't happen, that challenges don't happen, that divorces don't happen, and job losses or health issues. A happy life, when you start to do these sort of small micro things throughout the day, when you cultivate that habit, you become more resilient. So when challenging things happen, and they do, then you're able to cope with them in a more resilient way because you're sort of more stronger or better able to equip. And I think that that's a key piece, because sometimes if you think about like the really challenging or difficult things that you've gone through in your life, oftentimes those are the things that make us who we are, right? Or they help shift our purpose or our passion or things like that. And so it's not about a smooth sailing, no challenges,
how you respond,
margarita on the beach every day situation. It's about how do we sort of strengthen that muscle so that we can do that. You know, like writing a PhD about happiness took me, so my PhD actually took me 6 years because I switched from childhood obesity to happiness in the second year of my PhD. So it's a long grind about happiness, but the satisfaction I got when I finally like walked across the stage and got my diploma was so much more meaningful than if it was just a really easy thing that I didn't have to work at. You know, I think as people, we really have to remember that, especially when we're in the tough parts of it, is that, you know, sometimes these things that push us or stretch us or force growth can be the things that actually allow us to come more into who we are.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that for sure. As an artist, I was a starving artist for a long time, and then once things, it took me a decade to like, maybe like 8-9 years to get out of that mind state. But while I was in it, I was very unhappy because I was always like, when I pop off, when I succeed, when I make this. But I remember before that, I had a period in college where I was like meditating and spiritual, and I didn't have any needs or wants. I did want to be a star basketball player, but I was playing basketball every day, and life was simple, where I just meditate, read, and train. And then when my career ended in basketball, I was like, okay, I need to be great at being an artist or being a filmmaker. And then that's a very difficult jungle to get through as a creative. Like there's no like rule books on how to make it as a filmmaker. You just kind of pick pieces up from different stories and figure it out yourself. And it's also a very difficult field to succeed in. So I was just like, okay, I got to make it. And that can consume me. And I went from a very happy person to a very unhappy person over the years, because I was just like, I just need to do that. I just need to do what, rather than staying in the present and being like, okay, what can I do today?
Yeah. And
carpe diem. I forgot about carpe diem. I was just like 5 years, 10 years every day. And then that like that actually slowed me down.
Yeah.
And like, it was kind of like a handicap. But thankfully I got out of it, got back to my spiritual self, and things started opening up for me. So.
Yeah, and we see this, it's a very common narrative for people, like especially in the workplace, right? Like that you need to grind it out or work really, really, really hard, and then you'll be successful, and then you'll be happy. But all of the research actually shows that it's the opposite of that. So when we are happy along the way, then the outcome, we're more likely to be happy. It's not an issue of just sacrifice and grind it out, you know, for two reasons. One, nothing is guaranteed, right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And if we're not finding ways to cultivate joy in our life today, then we're not really living our life. And the other piece of it is that if you are just like walking down a path that's miserable, to think that all of a sudden there's a light at the end of the tunnel where everything's happy and everything's fine is so unrealistic, right?
100%.
But we have, and it's part of it's not our fault, because like, did you learn how to be happy in school?
No.
Did you have a course on it? Like now we're seeing, you know, universities are having courses, we're talking about it, but growing up, we were never taught. And so then you add on to that we have media, social media, marketing, advertising, TV, movies that are creating this narrative of what happiness is. And we're confused because that's not actually what happiness is. Happiness is not driving around in a fancy car with nice things. It's really about relationships and connection and all of those things. So a lot of it is having to educate ourselves in terms of what happiness actually is, and then asking that question for ourselves, because I think that's the other key piece, is that no one can tell you what makes you happy but yourself. And we actually have to do some independent self-discovery and learning and asking ourselves the question, like, so many times when I'm talking to research participants and I say, what makes you happy? They don't know the answer. Yeah. And so, okay, well, step one.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, Brandy.
That hedonic pleasure, and that can be to some extent, but you look at the other pieces, purpose, meaning, all of that plays into it too at a deeper level, that eudaimonic, as Aristotle would say, sort of type of happiness.
So speaking to that, I mean, you've studied successful, happy people. What are some commonalities that you see with these types, like in terms of like lifestyle, routines, career, family? What are some things you see in terms of like patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one is relationships and connection, social connection to other people. What we know, so there's a study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's the longest running longitudinal study of happiness in the world. And one of the lead authors, Dr. Robert Waldinger, just came out with a book last year called The Good Life. And essentially the punchline of the book, and I'm not ruining it, it's a great book.
They're going to look for it in Serbo-Croatian.
The Good Life. The number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness is social connection. So above where we live, our age, our geography, our education level, any of those things, having people that we connect with is the most important part. And I think that that's inherently a human thing, is to have that need for connection. And so essentially connection is necessary, but not sufficient. So yes, we need connection. I think it's an innate human part of us to want to feel that. And when I mean connection, it doesn't mean like 5,000 Facebook friends. It's the ability that if you're going through a hard time or you need to talk to someone, you have someone that you can talk to, even just one person. But it has to have the reciprocity, right? Because we all sometimes have those friends where it's one-sided. But that doesn't count because that's basically therapy, right? But you need that sort of, that they can listen and you be heard and that sort of thing,
Europeans.
Yes,
Europeans are good at this. So, I mean, we're speaking to mainly European people, but I think that's one foundational, I guess it's a foundational aspect, and then you build on top of it. So like in the Balkans, for example, that's a part of everyday life. People might not be doing great, you know, economically, but they're going to the coffee shop, they're hanging out with their day one friends. So I think that there's other things that the Balkans need healing on, but that I think that might be the string that's holding it together. And especially in Europe in general, that coffee shop culture, seeing your friends every day. I notice here that that's lacking. Like in my life personally, like it's very difficult to like even schedule coffee with a friend. It's not part of the culture. And then I notice in Pacific Asia, because I did a movie about my buddy who's a 40-year-old virgin, and like the numbers of virginity are growing because everybody's becoming more isolated in their devices. And I'm noticing that's growing, so I'm sure that's affecting happiness.
It really is, and I think when we talk about like, you know, what do we do to cultivate happiness, sometimes some of the things that actually do bring us a lot of joy, we don't pay attention to them. Like if it's part of the culture to go and see people, it really is bringing us some joy, but we sometimes forget because we get used to it, especially when it's embedded in the culture. And you look at like, you know, here in Canada, when we had our lockdowns and we were all isolated, a lot of people realized that you know, my friend that I see at the gym every Tuesday for a class, or the barista that I've talked to at the coffee shop, those little micro connections actually brought us more joy than we realized, but we almost took it for granted. And so I think it's great to celebrate and to really be mindful and aware that this social connection, which costs nothing, is something that's so important, and that's something we can all do. And yet what's also interesting about connection is that paradoxically, when we're feeling lonely or disconnected, you might think that that's when you're more likely to like reach out to a friend or text or call someone. But the lonelier we feel, the less likely we are to reach out. And so, you know, sometimes it requires us to do something we don't want to do, right?
Get out of the comfort zone.
Get out of it. It's like, you know, some days you don't want to go for a walk or go to the gym. You know you'll be better for it in the end, but sometimes we just have to force ourselves to do those things because we know that in the end, it's one of those decisions that once you get over that initial hurdle, it's not so bad.
Okay, so the foundational aspect you would say is social connection.
It's a huge, huge.
What about other things like family, career, any other commonalities you find with like really happy, successful people, so to speak?
Yeah, so a lot of times very happy people are very aware what their passions are or where they find meaning in their life. Some people find meaning in work. they find their work very fulfilling, and whatever it is that they're doing, they get a lot of meaning from that. Some people work as a job that allows them to do what they find meaning in their spare time. And both are okay, right? As long as you're clear on why you're doing what you're doing. If you want to work your job so that on the weekends you get to do whatever your hobby is, if you love art, if you love whatever it is, that's fine too. It's that we need to make sure that there is something. And this is why in North America we see oftentimes rates of death and cardiovascular events like heart attacks, strokes, things like that tend to increase when people retire. Because if someone's entire purpose or meaning was caught up in their work and their identity in that, and then that's taken away and they don't find something else, that can be a slippery slope into a bad place in terms of your health. So whether that be something that you enjoy as a hobby, it's work, it's both, having something that gives you purpose and meaning is another really important piece of the conversation.
Got it. Purpose.
And you see that with Tesla, right? He was so driven by purpose and meaning, and to like a very far extreme, right?
Yeah, he just wanted to push humanity forward.
That's right. And that's what, no matter how many trials and tribulations and things that went wrong and things that didn't go as planned, when you have that sort of North Star of working towards it, it allows you especially to keep going when things are hard or difficult or feel impossible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So 5 things that can make someone happier right away.
Okay. So I'm going to do a couple obvious ones first. The biggest one, if you're just like sitting right now and you're just kind of, you know, when you're in a bad mood or you're in a funk, the best way to quickly change your physiology is to move your body. So whether that be get up and go for a walk, put on a song and have a dance party, do something to start to move your body, because when you start to move your body, it starts to shift your mood. And so that can be something that, you know, you just, and you don't want to, you never want to, right? It's when you're tired and whatever, you just want to sit on the couch or whatever. Yeah, it's like, no, go. So that's a big one. Sleep is a huge one. And I think that this is something that it's becoming more of the conversation, but it's so important in terms of our mood. And what's interesting about sleep and happiness is we sort of go about them the same way. Like, you can't force yourself to sleep. Like, it's not like 9 o'clock, go to bed, fall asleep, right? But we can create conditions in which sleep is more likely to occur, or better sleep. So, you know, making sure we're not on our screens before bed, or having the room be a little bit cooler, darker, all of these conditions make it more likely that we're going to sleep better. And it's the same with happiness. Happiness is not guaranteed, but we can create conditions which are more likely to do it. So you can, for example, if you know the things that make you happy, like maybe having a clean house makes you happy, then doing that, right? Creating the conditions where it's more likely to occur. So sleep is a big one. And we've all had an amazing night's sleep, and you wake up and you just feel like the sun is shining and like everything is brighter and better. And we've all had the opposite experience too, where you don't get sleep and you're grumpy and you're on edge and you're getting snarky, right? Like we understand it, but it's something that I think is a big, big player. One of the things that I love is what's called gratitude. So practicing gratitude, which is becoming more of sort of a commonplace thing. But when I say practicing gratitude, all I mean is taking time to think about things in your life that you're thankful for, or that you appreciate, or that are going well. And I think that this is a key thing because 1, it doesn't take a lot of time. 2, it can be done anywhere. And 3, it doesn't cost anything. And what that does is we have this thing in our brain called the negativity bias. And we're all born with it. And it actually comes from a good place. So if we sort of hit rewind in time and we go back when we didn't have the modern conveniences of the world that we do, we were constantly on the lookout for predators and threats because we were in potential danger at all times.
Survival mode.
Exactly. But now, like, we're sitting here today and we're not worried that like a lion or a tiger or a bear is going to come in and eat us, right? And so what's happened is our brain hasn't caught up to the modern world. And so our brain is still running this old program of always looking for bad. And so we call this the negativity bias. And say, for example, today, 10 people said 10 compliments about you. And 1 person said 1 bad thing.
You'd focus on the bad.
When you go to bed tonight, what are you thinking about? The one thing. So that's a negativity bias. The good news is, once we know that it exists in our brain, we can actually sort of retrain our brain to almost like override it, like install new software kind of thing. So gratitude is a great way to do that, because when you look for things that you're thankful for things that you appreciate, you're looking for good things. So you're actually doing the opposite of the negativity bias. And it's something that is really powerful. And if you want to take it even further, like a lot of people will do like a gratitude journal. So they'll write down a couple things that they're thankful for. But the sort of next step of that is actually telling people that you're grateful, because then you're getting the social connection and that. And it
Double
feels
whammy.
nice, right?
Yeah.
For someone out of the blue to send a text and be like, I just really appreciated that you did this, or those sort of things. It's a great way to model that behavior for other people, to extend the benefit of it. And what's also really cool, this is research that was published in the British Medical Journal, done in the UK. And what they found is our happiness actually spreads 3 degrees from us. So when we focus on our happiness, it affects the people that we meet, but then also the people that they meet. So we see this sort of, butterfly or halo or ripple effect when we focus on our happiness.
Wow. That's a really important point that nobody really thinks about.
And the other thing, sometimes when I tell people about happiness, I'll get a comment like, I would love to focus on my happiness, but I have too many other things I have to take care of first, or I have to take care of everybody else. And then if there's anything left at the end, then I'll do it. And yet, and this maybe is another good tip, is that we actually have to do this. We have to fill our own cup, right? You can't give what you don't have. And it's not selfish to focus on your happiness. And in fact, and the reason I got into happiness research was I started reading literature looking at the connection between happiness and physical health. So what we see is that when we compare happy people to less happy people have lower rates of cardiovascular disease. They have stronger immune systems. They heal faster from injury. They tend to make better nutritional choices. They tend to sleep better, both in terms of duration and quality. So it feels good to be happy, but in terms of physical implications, we also see that. And so by prioritizing your happiness and making it something that you actually actively work at, you're putting yourself in a better place for all of those around you. We see outcomes in the workplace. Happier people, again, when we compare them to less happy people, they're more productive at work. They're better problem solvers. They get promoted more. They have longer and more fulfilling marriages and friendships. They're more altruistic. They're more likely to volunteer time or money. So it's really this one thing that inherently feels good, but these sort of other downstream effects of it are profound in so many different facets of our life.
Wow. So we got if you're in a funk, shake it out.
Move your body.
Get good sleep. We got focus on your happiness. I guess social, go see some friends. And anything else? Gratitude, sorry, important one.
And take care of yourself. I think nowadays, a lot of the culture is like, have a morning routine or do these things to hack your health or whatever. And
I'm guilty of that.
One of the things that we see is that, and myself, I tend to extremes. And so when morning routines were becoming popular, I was like, okay, so now I have to wake up in the morning and then I have to meditate and then I have to do my gratitude journal.
3 hours pass.
And it just becomes like an hour-long thing every day. And it almost felt like a tick box. I was going through the motions to just get everything done because that's what it's supposed to do. And so now when I kind of have come back a little bit, it's like, okay, I think it's important to do something, especially in the morning, that's intentional. But it changes because we're not the same person every day, and how we slept, what's going on is different. And there's no one perfect way to do that. But when we release the guilt of doing things for ourselves, reminding us it's not selfish, it's actually very selfless to take care of ourselves, because then we're in a better place for other people. It's so cliche, but I was on a plane yesterday and they always say at the beginning, right, you have to put your oxygen mask on. And it's cliche and people say it, but it's true, because
I did a skit about that. There's an ancient Serbian proverb that said, I forget it now. It's on my Instagram if you go on Big Nem, but I made a funny thing. It's like I referenced to that because it's something about God giving himself a beard first so he could give other people beards or something like that. And then it was like, when plane is in situation and oxygen mask fall, mother have to put on her first before baby. So exactly what you're talking about,
But right, it's giving ourselves that gift to do something nice for ourselves, to know that we're in a better place for everybody else, ourselves included, by doing that. Releasing the guilt and making sure it's just not another item on our to-do list, because when it becomes that, you're actually losing a lot of the benefits of doing it anyway. And it's hard and it's a practice. And even myself, when I was in grad school, and I was reading all these things like we're talking about, like gratitude. I would try them in my life because I'm like, okay, let's try it out. And so when I was reading about self-care, I thought, okay, at my university, they had like a massage therapy school. And so you could go and it was like students that were learning. So it was less expensive. And on a student budget, that was great. And so I thought, okay, self-care, I'll go for massages. But then I felt guilty because I felt like that hour was an hour that I should have been writing or working on my dissertation. Yeah. And I had to mentally sort of coach myself to be like, no, time isn't linear. And taking that 1 hour away charges your batteries. It helps you relax so that you show up and you're more productive afterwards. And so a lot of times we have to remind ourselves of that because we can get caught in that thinking of, oh, that's an hour I'm taking away from doing something productive.
That's how I used to think about sleep.
Yeah.
And you know, the grind culture is like, oh, you only need 6 hours. Like Schwarzenegger says, and Schwarzenegger's very accomplished. And, you know, I think it's a varying degree for each person. I read Matthew Walker's book. It blew my mind, Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep.
I was just like, oh, my God, because sleep is my biggest vice. I'm like a night owl, and I try so hard sometimes, and then it's like a drug for me to stay up. It's like I relapse, and then I'm exhausted if I work in the morning, and it's just like a constant thing. But when I created a nighttime routine, and I get in bed early and I have that little routine. I got the AC going, the dim light, all that stuff. It's helped me out a lot.
Yeah.
And it's something I have to manage constantly because I think genetically I'm like a night owl. I think he talks about that in the book. Some people have like varying degrees. Some people are born morning people. But I'm always much more productive when I wake up early, no matter what.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it's having that self-awareness as well to know what works for you, what you're doing because of habit versus being intentional about it. You know, I think a lot of times when we think about living and things like that, there's a number of years that we live, right? But then there's also like, what are we doing with that time? And if we're just getting through to get to whatever's next, we're missing out on a lot of the opportunity to actually enrich our life and to be happier or to create some of that and to have that awareness.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what is, you talk about the dark side of happiness. What is that?
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought this up. And I'll answer that in a second, but I think before that, one of the things that I didn't realize is that when you study happiness and you talk about happiness all the time, some people think that you're happy all the time. Yeah. And I'm like, no, like I'm a happiness researcher, I'm not happy all the time. Because that's not the point. And in terms of the dark side of happiness, sometimes it's referred to that in the literature, but what we see is that people who try to be happy all the time. It's like they put on their blinders, my goal in life is to be happy. Those people are less happy than other people. And when I first read that, I was like, how can that be, right? Like you think, okay, if I'm setting a goal of being happy and I don't reach it, at least like I'm trending in the right direction. But when you think about it some more, it's like, wait, what happens when we don't reach a goal, right? Our self-talk comes in, we get down on ourselves. And so it is impossible for all of us to be happy all the time. We are humans. We have a full spectrum of emotions. It's normal, healthy, and a good thing to experience a full range of emotions. And happiness doesn't even make sense in all contexts, right? If you're at a funeral, right, it doesn't make sense to be happy. Oftentimes. Depends whose funeral and who it is,
a very happy person who passed that wanted you to be happy.
And so it's really about, can we be happier than we are right now? Absolutely. Can we be happy all the time? Absolutely not. And what's interesting is even happiness as a field of research is a fairly new concept. So it wasn't until the mid-90s that Martin Seligman founded this field of psychology called positive psychology. So he was the president of the American Psychological Association, and he started this branch of psychology. And since then, we've seen a huge increase in the academic peer-reviewed literature. But we're constantly learning, right? Like we were talking about earlier. And so when happiness first sort of came on the scene, a lot of people thought that our happiness was like a set point. They call it set point theory. So essentially it's like a thermostat in a room, right? So you have your room set at whatever temperature, and then say you open the door and then it gets cooler in, so you shut the door and then it goes back, or you turn on the air conditioning or whatever. But it's like things happen up and down, but you go back to your set point. And so that's how people thought that happiness worked. So, you know, something good happens and then you go back to your set point, or something bad happens or challenging, back to your set point. But what we know now is there's sort of three main players in terms of impacting our total capacity for happiness. So the first one is genetics. So you can thank your parents or not, but it does play a role.
And for the trauma.
Yeah.
And ingenuity and trauma.
That's right. And I think that knowing that is important, but also knowing that the conversation doesn't end there. So the second big player is our environment. And I think especially all of us living through a global pandemic, we understand how our environment affects how we feel in our mood. And then the third piece, and this is the piece that my work focuses on, is our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors. Because what we know now is that, so not only can we increase our happiness short term, right? We do something, feels good, feels happy. But when you start to cultivate that muscle, like I was talking about doing these micro things, over time we can actually sustain our happiness at higher levels. So we all have the capacity to do that. We can't be happy all the time. It's not as simple as just choosing it. It requires work, but to know that there is that possibility and potential for all of us.
Interesting. So your set point can rise.
That's right.
By building your muscle.
Yeah, and it's not just a question of wherever in the world you were born, you're stuck with this, or whoever your parents are, you're stuck with that. Different people do start at different points, right? Like some people are naturally more positive and optimistic than other people. But we can all do things to bring more happiness into our life.
Nice. So in terms of the culprits that make us unhappiest in society, what are those right now?
So there's a lot. A big one is this idea of social comparison. Because one, what we know from research is we tend to compare up. So we look to people that have what we don't have, and then we look at our life and we always feel like
social media.
It's
like brain rot.
I know. And I mean, that's problematic for a multitude of reasons, but a couple, like for example, one, especially with social media, we're comparing the life that we live 24/7, 365 days a week, to snapshots of curated things that people have chosen to show us, which one, we don't know how much is staged or filtered. We don't know what was happening right before, right after they took that photo or video, right? And so we're, one, comparing to an unrealistic standard that isn't a full picture of life at all. And then the other problem is that there's no end to it, right? I read the book, The Psychology of Money. Have you read that?
No, I haven't read
It's a
that
great book. And at the beginning of one of the chapters, it opens with this story, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but the gist of the story is that there's two billionaires, like with a B, sitting on an island. And the one billionaire is slightly more wealthy than the other billionaire, but they're both billionaires, and they're sort of going on, and the one billionaire that's slightly more wealthy is, saying, I just bought this new jet or whatever, and he's listing off all these things. And then the other billionaire looks at him and he says, that's all great, but I have something that you'll never have. And the more wealthy billionaire is like, well, what's that? And he said, enough. And that's the thing. We have to know when is enough, because if we're always chasing more or the next thing, then we're just on a hamster wheel running, and we're missing out on experiencing it or being grateful for the things that we do have. Like if we think of some of the things, like I'm from London, Ontario. So it's a small town, well, not that small, but smallish, university town, 2 hours outside of Toronto. And my goal was always, one day I would live in the big city. And now I'm here and I'm living a dream that back then I couldn't have even imagined happening. And yet then I'm like, okay, well, where am I going to go next, right? This is a natural thing to kind of think that way. And yet some of the things that we have right now are things that we only dreamed of. And to be able to appreciate those things.
To be content and grateful for what you have.
Exactly. And to not always be, and it's hard because we have our devices at our fingertips 24 hours a day if we choose to allow that, right? And so that's a big one, especially when we look in terms of our mental health and our happiness, things that are actually detracting from it. It's a really big one. And it happens sometimes without even the awareness that we're doing it, right? You're scrolling and you're just naturally comparing yourself.
Without, you're unconsciously
like,
comparing. So I guess there's social media, and then, the opposite of being social is isolation. And usually those two are connected, social media and isolation.
And I mean, the World Health Organization has declared that we have a loneliness epidemic right now. And we also know from research that loneliness can be as detrimental to our physical health as alcoholism, smoking, or obesity. So it isn't even just a question of you feel sad because you're alone. The physical effects, just like how happiness can have beneficial effects in terms of our physical health, loneliness, so lack of social connection, can have detrimental effects. And I think that that's something that, especially now, you can, and just because you're in proximity to a person doesn't mean you feel connected, right? Like you can go to a party and feel almost more alone than being by yourself, because you're not feeling like you're connecting with people. So
they're not your
being
spirit
alone
souls.
and being lonely are not the same thing. And I think a lot of people would benefit from having time alone, right, with their thoughts, not on devices. But that's different than feeling lonely when you're feeling disconnected. That's a challenge because, and like I said, when we are experiencing those feelings, we're less likely to reach out to other people.
Wow. I was going to ask you in terms of what's the connection between our happiness and our hormones, such as like dopamine or serotonin. I don't know if you've done any work on that.
Yeah, well, so hormones are, you know, essentially like messengers that are going around our body and helping us. And so we're physical people in terms of the body that we have, but we also are physiological. And so things like dopamine, right? This hormone of reward. And when we're talking about like following your passion or pursuit, that's something that can help to motivate us along the way. Or even oxytocin, right? Sometimes you hear it referred to as like the cuddle hormone, right? To help us feel connected. So hormones play a role in our mood, in our lived experience of how we see, perceive, interpret the world. And it really is something, and one of the questions I get asked a lot when it comes to happiness is this question around pharmaceuticals, right? And you look at sort of rates of depression and prescribed antidepressants. And the way I see it is that step number one is, are you doing everything that you possibly can to create, like I talked about creating the conditions for sleep, to create the conditions for happiness, right? Like what are you eating? How much sleep are you getting? What are you listening to in terms of podcasts, audiobooks, hopefully things like this?
Yeah. What's your
like, what
information
are you filling
diet?
your mind with?
Yeah.
Are you just listening to the radio all the time? Do you have CNN? I have an aunt that has
News.
CNN on 24/7 at her house, and it's so stressful to be there, right? So what is your environment? What are you creating? What are you listening to, right? Those things. Are you moving your body? Is a big piece. The other side of that coin is that, like, if you think about building a house, right? You need all the things to build a house. So you need like doors and windows and bricks. And if your body doesn't produce the precursor to serotonin or the receptor that helps, no amount of gratitude and everything is going to fix the fact that your house has no bricks or no windows. So there's a time and a place, and it's not a panacea, magic fix, quick pill, right? There's a piece here that's personal responsibility in terms of, are you doing everything within your control? And that's a big one. And this idea of what's in your control versus what's not your control, you know, I mean, it dates back to like Stoic philosophy, but it's huge. So in research, we call it autonomy. So essentially autonomy is like, okay, there's some things in your life that you can control. This is like very Stoic as well, right? And there's some things you can't. And choosing to give more of your focus, more of your energy, more of your resources to the things that you can control is more, so autonomy is more of a predictor of our happiness than how much money we have, how popular we are, how good looking we are, or how good our sex life is. So I mean, I'm listing those off and people are probably like, yeah, okay, I get
Take
how
notes.
those impact our happiness, but more of a predictor is this concept of autonomy. Autonomy doesn't mean that you micromanage and control everything in your life. And there's a lot of things that are going on in our life that we do not have control over. But there are areas of opportunity where we do, right? What are you listening to? Who are you following on social media? What are you doing in your spare time? What are you listening to? Who are you talking to? All of those things, we sometimes maybe just discount it in terms of its impact, but it is quite profound, this idea of really focusing on it.
Yeah, I was reading about dopamine and basically how you get a dopamine spike for something that you want, and you can either, and everything that goes up must come down. And basically, if you want short-term gain, something that makes you feel really good really quick, you get a crash. So like people like talk about pornography, junk food, sugar, drugs. If they're, let's say, an nymphomaniac, it's just like it shoots up, you feel so good, but then long term it just crashes, and then you're searching for that hit of dopamine constantly. And then the other way, to the opposite side of that is like short-term pain for long-term gain, where it's like, no, I'm not going to do those quick fixes. I'm going to build a foundation of dopamine, work towards something the harder way, and like build healthy habits. So like I don't know if you can speak on that, kind of those two different ways of going about things.
Yeah, and to your point too about, you know, like the sex, drugs, rock and roll piece, it's so easy to get that quick hit. But when we look in terms of what actually brings us purpose, satisfaction, meaning, fulfillment, it requires effort and struggle to get there. And so if we just sort of short circuit that and get the quick fix, it's not going to bring us the same thing that we're actually really reaching for, right? Because a lot of times the things in our life that are good require effort and work over a long period of time. Like, you know, Tesla's a great example of this, of constantly having to figure out how to overcome challenges to work towards the greater goal, and to understand that there's certain pleasures in daily life that are fine once in a while, but when you get caught up in that, then you're losing out on the bigger piece, right? You're getting this little hits here and there and whatever, but you're also missing out on sort of this thing. I think we have this world where we want things to always be easy and quick and fast. And it's like, well, why is that, right? Convenient and this, and it's great in a way in terms of maybe saving time, but it's also taking away some of that other side of it, which is where, you know, a lot of things that we do in our life that are really meaningful require work.
Okay, so that leads into the topic that I wanted to touch on with you in terms of psychedelics. We're entering a new renaissance of psychedelics, and I don't know if you can speak on that, because I have a lot of friends that are in that industry. The pharmaceutical industries are changing. Canada is kind of one of the trailblazers for psychedelic medicine and mental health, where they're trying to get rid of these damaging, sometimes necessary, but many times damaging pharmaceutical drugs, like antidepressants and things that have ruined people's lives, certainly helped certain people, but like there's a lot of side effects to them. And now they're learning that psychedelics have far fewer, sometimes if any, side effects, negative side effects, but the positive side effects far outweigh the negative. So they're kind of integrating that into mental health and the healthcare industry. And we're about maybe like, I don't know, 3 to 4 years away from that. But I don't know if you can speak on that.
Yeah, you know, it's a really interesting, we were talking earlier about science moving conversations forward and investigating things and learning things. And this is a great example of a field where there is a plethora of work being done right now, and we're learning a lot of things. What I love about this is that we're opening up the door to multiple conversations. And just like with happiness, like there's no one size fits all formula for happiness. And for people to have evidence-based tools and strategies in their toolbox that they can access, and especially with psychedelics, right? We want to think about things like, you know, making sure that set and setting and things like that.
Can you tell people what you mean by set and setting in case they don't know?
So with psychedelics, a lot of the medically assisted and the research is done in a controlled setting. So it's in an environment where they're controlled. They're not just like walking down the street in downtown Toronto taking mushrooms. And the setting, right? So what is the music like, the environment? Is there someone guiding you through it? Because sometimes people can have a very euphoric experience, but they can also have experiences that are scary, especially if you're hallucinating or seeing things. And so having that safety piece to make sure that people are okay and that it's being used with intention, and it's not this sort of recreational go to a rave and take some MDMA. But when it's used intentionally, we're starting to see some really interesting things coming out. And I think that that's a perfect example of the beauty of science and being able to explore different possibilities and having different options for people. Both, you know, even with like mushrooms, right, on the psychedelic side, but even on the medicinal side. Like when we look at things like chaga or reishi or lion's mane, like even when I was doing my PhD, I have a friend that was is a mushroom forager, and I would spend hours and hours and hours in the forest with him learning about all different types of mushrooms, but particularly medicinal and culinary as well. We did find some amanitas one time in Northern Ontario.
That's cool.
But learning about the mushroom kingdom is just one of the most fascinating, like mind-blowing things. And I remember I was going for a hike just outside of London when I was writing my PhD, and I found lion's mane. And I took the lion's mane home. I took it off the log, brought it home, dried it out in the sun, made tea, made tincture, and lion's mane can be great for cognitive function. And so I foraged my own lion's mane while I wrote my dissertation about happiness. And that made me happy. But I think there's so many things that we don't know, and so many things that we're continuing to learn and evolve, and to allow those pieces to be having a seat at the table, I think is really exciting. And there's been even the stigma associated with talking about psychedelics, you know, or things like that. 10 years ago, we were not having that conversation. We would not be
I
sitting here
was.
saying
I was
that.
the crazy guy on
Not
the
on
street.
camera, at least.
Yeah.
It's an off-camera
I was the
conversation.
guy listening to Tim Ferriss and talking about microdosing, and
Yep.
and then people looked at me crazy, and then as the years went by, it's like, oh, did you try microdosing this? I'm like, oh, okay.
There's been a couple trailblazers, like
Yeah,
Andrew
yeah.
Weil's been really good.
Andrew Weil, I don't
Andrew
know.
Weil, he's a physician.
Interesting.
He's great.
I
You
listened to
like him.
Fadiman on what's his first name? James Fadiman. He's one of the trailblazers in psychedelic science, and he's a very spiritual guy. And he went on Tim Ferriss, and I thought I was listening to a guy that's, I don't know, a 30-year-old professor, young guy. I looked him up. He was in his mid 80s at the time,
Wow.
and sharp,
Wow.
just easy going. I thought he was 30, and then I was just like, this guy's 85 now. I think he's like in his 90s or late
Wow.
80s, but it was fascinating to learn all those things, and I think we're entering a new era.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, obviously, just like with any health information, it's how do we sort of sift through to figure out what's evidence-based versus what's not is a piece, and that discernment is important. But it's also just like being able to allow people to open up the conversation for them to empower themselves to figure out what they need, right? Whether it's what do I need to be happy, what are some tools, different types of, cognitive behavioral therapy might be great for some people. There's being able to empower people to try different things and see what works for them, I think is a really exciting advancement that we're seeing across the board. And that's where the beauty is and the magic lies, because we all have to do that for ourselves, you know? And it's not like with happiness, you figure out, okay, these 5 things make me happy, and then you're set for life, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think about what made you happy when you were 10 versus now,
Transformer
versus
toys.
when you're 100, it's constantly evolving. Some things will work for certain people at different times, different things work depending on different life situations, experiences, all of that. But it's being a conscious person that's participating in that, as opposed to being just sort of a passive consumer of life, where you blink and then life passes you by and you're like, whoa, I lived years, but I didn't live, right?
Let's go back to Tesla. Your great
We got to figure out that exact
uncle.
answer. We got to figure it out.
So Tesla, considered a savant, he's actually a saint in some Hindu sub-branches of Hinduism. He's considered a saint.
That's amazing.
Which is a
I
fun
didn't know
fact.
that is a
yeah,
fun fact.
so he's considered like a bodhisattva character, like a reincarnated high-level spirit, and almost all of our technology that we use today is somehow related to Tesla, especially electrically or wirelessly. It's pretty fascinating. I like to tell people, like, the fact that almost everything we use is related to Tesla, and it's less than 1% of his inventions that ever got made, shows how genius he was. But what interests me is how he talked about frequency and vibration, and said that humanity and science needs to think in terms of those things to take the next leap. And he also talked about how science and spirituality are not mutually exclusive. So this brings all sorts of human beings from all walks of life with varying interests into the alternative under the umbrella of Tesla. You see a lot of wacky characters, but many times geniuses. But what I enjoy most when we talk about Tesla and the people that love Tesla is people who are curious. So I was going to ask you, and you don't have to get into specifics, but you can if you want. What are some of these alternative things that really interest you in terms of maybe like spirituality, science that's not really here yet, or things around Tesla? And how do you balance those interests being a respected academic at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it started young. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was
This is the meat that all the moms want to hear about.
Okay.
Yeah, they're like spiritual and stuff. So.
When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was stressed out all the time. I was always good at math and science, maybe some of the Tesla genes.
Yeah,
and so if you're good at math and science, the plan is you go to medical school, right? So growing up, I was like, I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. And then it's very stressful, especially in your undergraduate degree, right? You're taking like biochemistry and organic chemistry, and it's stressful and difficult. And so I was constantly stressed, and I was like trying to figure out what I can do. And so in addition to the cheap massages, they also had a hot yoga studio. It was a moksha yoga studio in London. And on Friday nights, they had cheap classes, $5, $5 for students. Mostly students went. And so I thought, oh, I'll try this hot yoga thing. And it felt more like a workout than typical yoga. So it felt like I was doing something, because I was always like, no, yoga's like spiritual. Like I just had no connection. But I'm like, okay, here at least I'll go in, I'll stretch, but I sweat. So I feel like I had a workout. And so I started going to these $5 yoga classes. And after a while, I started noticing that I was less stressed. And I was like, hold on a second, something's going on here, because I actually am observing in myself that I feel less stressed. So I'm a naturally curious person. So I thought, okay, well, what's going on there? Which evolved into, I've done 4 yoga teacher trainings throughout grad school.
Congrats.
Trying to learn, like, what is it about yoga that's helping me, right? And there's definitely sort of the physiological part, but there's also the mental part. And it was something that started me on this path of thinking about, okay, well, there's more to life than just like the nuts and bolts. The math, the science is piece of it, but there's more to that conversation. And what does that look like? Or, you know, I think all of us have had experiences through our life where things just serendipitously happen, or the synchronicities are just, they blow your mind, right? And I love that feeling of like
how we
having
met.
your mind. Yes, exactly.
Through J Money.
Yeah.
Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Shout outs. Yeah.
But it's just these little things where you just, and I used to listen to Wayne Dyer a lot, Dr. Wayne Dyer, when I was in grad school. And he was sort of an example of this, where he was a psychologist, but he would talk about, you know, more spiritual things. And I would listen to his lectures. I always knew that connection to nature was important. And my university, it's a beautiful campus, and they have hiking trails. And so I would go in the afternoon, take a break from my research, and I would go hiking, and I would listen to Wayne Dyer a lot. And one of the things that Wayne Dyer used to always say, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically like, some people live in a happy, positive, optimistic world. Some people live in an angry, vengeful, hateful world. And then he'd be like, it's the same world. And so I've thought about that too, right? The way we perceive things and how we choose to interpret them. And so sometimes when these synchronicities happen and these mind-blowing, and maybe it's just a narrative that I'm creating for myself, but that's the world I want to live in, because I want to live in a world where, you know, there is more going on. And just because we don't know, or we're not open to, or we are open to sort of not being able to understand everything, right? Like life is complicated. We're humans. It's very difficult, even with research. It's difficult to study humans because we're so complex, right? And we're constantly changing. It's not like we can do a nice experiment in a petri dish where we can control all of the settings, right? We're humans. We're living, breathing people. We have emotions. We have thoughts. And that plays a powerful role in our life. And I think the curiosity piece, if you really bring it down to the core, that's where I lean into, because that allows you to be open to possibilities instead of just shooting things down right away. Like, oh, that's impossible. That can't be done, right?
We have a lot of that today.
If someone did that to Tesla, we might not be sitting here with the conveniences in the modern world that we have.
Oh, they did do it to Tesla.
They did do it,
but his inventions were so great that we're here. However, if he somehow broke through those other levels of adversity, we'd probably be 500 years into the future.
So I have a question for you about that. So, you know, when you read about Tesla's life and stuff, he was so focused on work to his detriment sometimes. Like, for example, especially when he was young, right? He worked, especially when he was in school, so hard that it affected his physical health. Like, he would get sick. Or in his adult life, he was so focused on work that personal relationships, dating, women, he wanted nothing to do with. He ate alone a lot of times.
He was completely celibate.
Yeah, and so now I sit here and I'm like, okay, I see the research on the benefits of connection and on, you know, how important it is to take care of our physical health because it's related to our mental health. And so then I think, well, imagine also what would have happened if this idea of grind, 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 sacrifice, close it off, what would have been different if focusing on health or relationships would have been a part of it.
Or if he had a strong woman behind him that said, don't rip up your royalty agreement with Westinghouse, you could still be a trillionaire and then not need funding.
Right. But like questions, right? And I think sometimes we look at very notable people that have accomplished things and we put them on a pedestal and we celebrate them for that. But if we zoom out and we look at someone's complete picture of their life, we can learn a lot from that too, right? And so like, you're thinking, okay, well, what if, I think about that in terms of relationships or health as well. Like, what else could have been possible?
Yeah, later in his life, in his older years, he said that he regretted being on his own.
Yeah.
He regretted not having a family.
And like,
which is interesting.
I can see, like, especially when I was writing my dissertation, like sometimes there's a time and a place where you need full focus, right? Where you need that, but then that can't be your whole life, in my opinion. If
people who are great, you notice that their career and their mission is first, but they all, like, many of them still have families that are there to support them. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to consider, right? Yeah. All these different things and how people live, we learn from them, right? And we learn the good, the bad, the things that we would want to do the same differently. We get inspired in different ways. And I think, like, in spite of all that, the fact that, he was, very isolated and had health challenges through a lot of his life, he still did all that. Yeah. Like, that's incredible. Like, when I really think about, or you start looking at all the patents that he had and all the things that he was constantly thinking about, to have that level of passion, to have that level of drive. Like, sometimes when I'm not feeling that, I'll almost like mentally tap into that because, right, it's sort of like one of the things that people say about psychedelics is that, oftentimes it opens you up to possibilities that you never knew existed or feelings that you never knew existed. And once you've been there, then you can go back because you've experienced it, right? There's like a memory there or a remembering. And so I think that it's also something where when we think about all these different things, tapping into the really passion of someone like Tesla, it can help us too, right? Because it helps us when we're not feeling that to sort of get back into that space. It's right. It's like listening to inspiring books or reading inspiring texts or bodies of work, right? All of those things can be fuel for us to continue that conversation through our curiosity.
Yeah. And speaking of Tesla, he wanted to help humanity. I think he saw us all as kind of his children, maybe not children, but family. And like, he wanted to help push humanity forward. So that like leads into my next question. What can we do as a collective, in your opinion, to become a happier human race?
So, it's a good question.
Curriculums, maybe?
A big time. I think a really big thing, and something that I think is incredible with some of the advancements in modern technology, like we're having a conversation in Toronto that can be seen anywhere in the world, is finding like-minded community to be around, whether that's, in physical thing or, people that are all passionate about Tesla that come together to talk about him and create that shared passion and interest and the community around it to create that sense of belonging and togetherness and sort of something, a goal that's greater than yourself, right? A lot of times when we're feeling depressed or whatever, we get very caught up in me and I. And so sometimes having something that's greater than yourself to work towards or to have a shared common goal is something that I think is so important, finding that community, finding those people that are interested in the same sort of things that you are, that can have conversations about things that you're interested in or that will listen to you or that you can play and explore in your mind with them. I think that and the kindness around that too and the mutual respect, I think that a lot of times now it's like us versus them mentality, right? You either think this way or you think this way. And people are so dogmatic on either side and not allowing like the nuance and the gray of being a human to be a part of it, And I think the other piece is like being kind to ourselves. Like I live in, Tim Ferriss talks about this all the time, right? Like never attribute to malice that which could be attributed to stupidity. Have you heard him say that?
Yeah, I heard him say that. Yeah.
I heard him say that years ago, and I always think about that. Like, imagine if we lived in a world where we didn't go around assuming that everyone was bad, and but just we're doing the best that we can with what we have. Yeah. When we look at life through that lens, then it gives us grace and compassion for other people, and to accept we're all in different parts of our journey, right? And we're all trying to figure it out and being kind to ourselves, giving ourselves grace along the way. And I think especially with the younger generation, like I was in Costa Rica in March. The UN has a university there. It's called the University for Peace, and they host a gross global happiness conference. So I'm at the happiness conference. Nice. And this year I did a talk about Gen Z and mental health. And we're seeing, rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, all these things increasing with that generation. And part of it, I think, is that, you know, we are living in this world where we're constantly comparing, we're constantly on. And so part of it is, you know, unplugging a little bit and also being kind to ourselves to know, and especially for the Gen Z, life isn't a formula where you have it figured out and then you execute the equation, right? Mm-hmm. We're constantly learning. And I think especially with the younger generation, what do I want to be when I grow up? What does that look like? And knowing that like the world is constantly changing, we don't have to have it all figured out. Like I wish someone would have told me that. I still don't have it all figured out. Like I didn't even know you could study happiness until the second year of my PhD. And what do you do with a PhD in happiness when you're not going to be a tenured professor? I don't know, figuring it out, right? So that grace to enjoy the journey, I think is a big piece of it. One of my, so during the pandemic, I did a talk at Lakehead University. So that's in Northern Canada.
I've been there, yeah. Played ball against them.
Yeah, it's cold.
Yeah.
And so the professor that had invited me to speak virtually, I was talking like how we talked about earlier, like happiness is not a destination. And after the webinar, we were chatting on Zoom and she said, you know, Jillian, when you were talking about like happiness not being a destination, it reminds me of this photo that I have on my fridge at home. And she's like, I'm going to send it to you. And I was like, okay. And so it's from this book, which is based in Buddhist philosophy, and it's called Big Panda, Tiny Dragon. It's a great, I think there might be a couple books in the series now too, but it's a great children's book to sort of help to introduce them to some of the Buddhist concepts and philosophies. And so this picture that she showed me, it's got the big panda and the tiny dragon sitting on his back, and they're like walking down a path. And it says, what's more important, asked Big Panda, the journey or the destination? And then it says, the company, said Tiny Dragon. And I think that's the piece of it. It's not even just about where you're going, but it's about who you're going there with. And the people and the community and the tribe. That to me is something that I would love to see on a global scale, people finding that community and not just focused on the destination, but enjoying the journey as you get there, right?
That's what we're doing here. We're building a tribe.
That's right.
Yeah, I got my crazy NEMS World tribe. Nenad's got his Nenad Toronto tribe, and we're actually joining different tribes together. We're joining your tribe today.
And this is what I love, because when you join different tribes, that's where creativity and innovation can thrive, right? Like even when I switched, so I used to study childhood obesity. When I switched into happiness, I used to still like to go to the obesity conferences because my friends were there. I've been studying obesity. And so then because I was studying happiness, I would go to an obesity conference and present about happiness and obesity at an obesity conference. And at the time, like the mental health conversation is a lot sort of more prevalent now. But even back then, it was considered innovative because I was talking about mental health at an obesity thing and happiness. And so this is where I love when things come together, especially from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different interests, because when there's mutual respect and community and belonging, that is what really fosters innovation and creativity and really helps to move the needle forward.
Nice. I was going to ask my last question. What's your current daily routine that leads to your current kind of happiness?
So we talked about morning routines. I don't have a specific morning routine, but every morning I do something intentional with my morning. So I live by myself. I have a French bulldog, Jocko.
He's very cute.
He's cute. He's a great guy. And so he's actually doesn't like getting up in the morning.
You got him from Bulgaria.
I did. I went to Bulgaria and I got a French bulldog in Bulgaria. So I have a Bulgarian French bulldog. And he actually has a passport. It looks just like an EU passport, but it says pet passport. And so I brought him home as my carry-on. He went through customs and immigration here in Toronto. And so he likes to sleep in the morning. So usually I get up and I'll do something, whether it's, actually there is one thing I do consistently. I have 3 books that I read, like page-a-day books. So I read The Daily Stoic, so Ryan Holiday's book. It has like 1 Stoic thought per day. I read The Daily Laws, Robert Greene. His book, and so there's sort of 1 thought about something, mastery, or it depends what the month is, there's different themes. And then I am a big fan of the Grammar Girl podcast.
Never heard of them.
Oh, Mignon Fogarty is her name. I'm a huge fan. I've been listening to her. She's been around since like Tim Ferriss has been around in podcasting, like many, many years. And she has like quick and dirty grammar tips, and I love that. So I feel like that is a great way to put something in my mind. I think that when we're constantly learning or learning new things or reading, that's a big piece. But I also sometimes, one, don't have a lot of time, or my mind feels really full, but to just sort of start it with a couple little thoughts to get the wheels turning is something that I really like to do. And then every day is different. But I think for me, it's about making sure that I'm doing things in my day that make me happy. And some things I'm going to do in my day that I don't like to do. Like, I do not like doing email. It is not fun. I don't like anything about it. But it's part of being an adult in this world. But, you know, I'll like scheduling going to the gym every single day, put it in the calendar, go. Have those anchors so that I have sort of those, we talked about those micro moments at the beginning, right? Those things that I know I'm going to do that make me happy. And the other piece is, like, sometimes I'm just having a bad day. We all have bad days, right? And then you add on the layer of like a woman and hormones we talked about, right? There's different things that some days I'm just like, you know what? I'm not having a good day today. I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to sit there and try to force working on my book or doing something like that. I'm just going to call it today. I'm going to do a I love jigsaw puzzles. So, you know, I'll just be like, you know what? Today is a jigsaw puzzle day. Chill, start again the next day. Give myself grace to have that day, and then start fresh the next day. And you don't let that continue into the next day. Like, I had a bad day yesterday, therefore today is going to be a bad day. Like, you just sort of take it day by day. And, you know, one of my biggest regrets, and I don't know if that's the right word, but like, I wish I would have studied my or assessed my happiness when I first started studying happiness. Because I didn't do it, so I don't know. But anecdotally, my hypothesis is that I'm happier now than I was then. And I've always been a bit more on the positive, optimistic side, but it really is a habit and a practice. And I catch myself sometimes seeing that. So even, for example, yesterday I was in Kansas City, and there was no direct flight from Kansas City to Toronto. So I had to fly through O'Hare, Chicago. Hate that airport. And
well, I told you I had a bad experience there.
Yeah, I think everyone's had a bad experience at least one day.
O'Hare.
Oh. So anyway, I had an hour connection, so it's tight. And then before I even boarded, it became a 40-minute delay on the inbound plane that was coming in, so we weren't going to leave. So now I have 20 minutes to get off the plane, and who knows what terminal you're going to and whatever. So I'm starting to get nervous. I call the airline, and I'm talking to the lady, and I said, you know, maybe I should just get on a different flight. And then the next flight, there was 2 seats left, and then the next flight wasn't until 9:30 that night. So it was a really big, like 7.5-hour layover. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to stress myself out over this 20 minutes when it's a 2.5-hour delay, but I know I'm going to get on that flight, because if I don't and I miss the connection and those 2 seats are gone, now I'm on the nighttime flight. And so I'm talking to a lady, and I said, you know, I fly all the time. I travel a lot for work. I do a lot of travel for speaking. I've never actually missed a connection in my entire life. And it's the first time. So, you know, it's going to happen. And I'm like, I'm glad it's happening on the way home, not the way there. And I was talking to the lady, and I was just processing my thoughts in my head as I'm working this out. And then I got to the end of the call, and I said to the lady, like, thank you so much. And she said, you know, I've never had someone that was dealt with this situation in such a positive way. And I was like, oh, and I thought about it. I was like, a lot of people get so angry and so frustrated.
Well, I'm the happiness doctor.
But it made me realize, like Wayne Dyer used to always say, when you squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice. His point is that under stress, whatever's inside comes out. And I wasn't intentionally being like, Jillian, be positive, have a positive attitude. But as the habit starts to form, you realize that in certain situations, you did what you've been doing and talking about, because it's now a habit and a pattern. And a lot of our happiness is cultivating that pattern. Even with gratitude, you'll see that most people, when they start practicing gratitude, you fast forward, you know, a couple months down the road, you listen to the words that they say, and you'll notice them say things like, oh, I'm really grateful for that, or they start to notice more good. And so that is one thing I think, that trying the habits, trying them on, seeing what works, giving ourselves the grace to be a human, that's what overall collectively is a happy life. No one's happy all the time, but it's something that I think that we get inspiration from people. We learn, we have conversations, and we continually grow and evolve. And I think that that's the beauty of life, and to be able to do that collectively is even more exciting.
Well, thank you, Jillian. I really appreciate you being here today. I think we'll lead into Tesla Fest and something that we're doing together here. I'll give people an overview of what Tesla Fest is. It's the first internationally recognized Nikola Tesla Festival in Niagara Falls on Friday, July 12th and Saturday, July 13th. And it opens up at the Niagara Parks Power Station, which is one of the first hydrocentral power plants ever built in the world by Nikola Tesla himself, your great uncle. And we are having speakers come from all walks of life. We are conjoining research, science, and spirituality in one place. And Dr. Mandich will be speaking on the topic that we spoke about today as one of our speakers at the Tesla Legacy Series and Tesla Legacy Conference, which opens up Tesla Fest. So that's going to be on Friday, July 12th. And then the following day is the festival, live music. There's like sound healers coming. Awesome. And like there's a DJ that incorporates healing frequencies.
Movement, dance.
Yeah, dance, you know, vendors, food, Serbian food.
Oh, yay. Community. Right?
Community. It's a global event, but obviously there's a Serbian element. So I'm inviting everybody. I know most of you will be in the Balkans, but Nenad will be doing a live stream for those lucky subscribers. And I hope that you will enjoy our conference and our wonderful guest speakers, including all these characters that we brought together, including obviously you, Jillian. I wanted to give you a little care package.
Oh.
From the festival.
Oh,
so you
can I open it?
Up. Yeah, we'll do. So you got a little T-shirt there.
Ooh.
With your great.
Oh, this is so cool!
Uncle.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Tesla Fest.
Yeah.
Look at
It's
that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So look at, there's a patent. This is actually the patent I have on my wall.
No way.
Yeah. I'll have to send you a photo after. There's more in the middle here that the logo's on. That's yeah.
Amazing.
And
then
this
you got
is
the electric
so cool.
circuit pin.
I love
this. So
this.
that's our promotionary tool. You can buy one for $10. It basically means that you're joining the culture of Tesla and you're joining his electric circuit, which is global. And the catchphrase is, I'm in.
Can I read the back? This is really
yes,
good.
Go for it.
It says, imagine a world where borders fade and humanity comes together, hand in hand, forming an electrifying circuit that spans the globe. Tesla's revolutionary contributions to electricity and technology laid the foundation for a better, more modern life. Now, it's time to connect the threads of this shared legacy and create a powerful network that transcends all boundaries. Embrace the spark and proudly declare, I'm in. I love that. That's so good. And people can buy these,
They can buy them, yeah. They're in stores around Toronto and Ontario. I think you can order them online. The Instagram is teslafest.ca. That's also the website, teslafest.ca, so you can follow. And why don't you tell everyone what you've got going on and where they can find you?
Yeah, so I will be at Tesla Fest. I'm so excited. And I think some of my family will come too. Nice. And everything of mine is jillianmandic.com. It's Jillian with a G, Gillianmandic, and then there's an H at the end. Yeah. My grandparents added it when they came here. And my Instagram is Dr. Dr. Jillian Mandich, and those are good places to find me.
Well, thank you so much, Jillian. I really appreciate you. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to Nenad Toronto. We got a lot more Tesla talks coming, but we have been blessed here by Dr. Mandich today, so I hope you enjoyed our chats. Take care.